Hello and welcome back to our reading of Island of the Blue Dolphins. Today we are going to continue reading with chapter 12. As always, if you would like to print anything that is connected to this book study, you can find it on connectedplanetlearning.com. It is free. You just need to subscribe as a member and agree to the educational use agreement. But all those resources are free and they do align with what we are reading here and can be used for multiple books as well. But they are listed there under Thinking Journal for Island of the Blue Dolphins. If you'd like to print that out, you are welcome to. Otherwise, just have a piece of note paper by or a parking lot whiteboard where you can write down ideas, thoughts, and connections that you are making as we are reading. So really quickly recapping what we read about last time. The most important thing, well, one of the most important things from last chapter was that she went down the trail singing along the beach as she had, remember, returned to the island, and now she was deciding to make it her home and kind of feel like it was a new home. And she was singing, and that's the first time that we hear about her singing in the whole book so far. And we're already on chapter 12 or page 69. So this whole time she's kind of had a lot of things to worry about, a lot of battles to fight, just being on her own. And so the last sentence of the last chapter it says this: "It was a good day to begin my new home." And we also talked about the thought of, is it really a new home or is it just mentally a new home? Has she now decided that her place is on this island and she's going to make the best of it and it's her home? So let's find out what happens next. Okay, so listen for some of our key words. Remember, our key information predictors of what we might find out are words that are repeated over and over. We've heard the dog with the yellow eyes over and over. We've heard her mention her name, Wanapale, and that is her secret name. So keep those things in mind as you're listening and see if you spot them anywhere in this chapter or the next. Let's go. Many years before, two whales had washed up on the sand spit. Most of the bones had been taken away to make ornaments, but ribs were still there, half buried in the sand. These I used in making a fence. One by one, I dug them up and carried them to the headland. They were long and curved, and when I had scooped out holes and set them in the earth, they stood taller than I did. I put the ribs together with their edges almost touching and standing so that they curved outward, which made them impossible to climb. Between them, I wove many strands of bull kelp, which shrinks as it dries and pulls very tight. I would have used seal sinew to bind the ribs together, for this is stronger than kelp, but wild animals like it and soon would have gnawed the fence down. Much time went into this building. It would have taken me longer, except that the rock made one end of the fence and part of the side. So before we go on, I want you guys to think about what this fence looks like. She grabbed whale bones, rib bones of the whale. So I'm actually going to draw that for you just so that you can kind of see. Okay, so rib bones, they're kind of curved, but she put them kind of going out like this. So remember, she's trying to make a fence so that the dogs cannot climb. So the rib bones are like this, okay? So there's ribs on this side, and then there's ribs on this side. And so she's making a fence that way, and they curve out. This way the dogs can't climb them, right? Because if the dogs come on this side, they'll get to the top and they'll fall over. But then she has a problem. She's got all these spaces in between. So what she does is she takes the sinew or the muscles from some animals, and she kind of, I believe it was, what was the other thing? The kelp, bull kelp, which is basically grass that grows in the water. And she weaves the kelp back and forth, okay? So that it kind of makes a fence that the dogs can't come through, okay? So she's weaving this plant, she's weaving it back and forth around the whale bones to make a fence. Why does she use plant instead of the muscle that I just mentioned before incorrectly? because if she used the muscle from animals, of course the dogs would want to chew on it, kind of like a bone, and eventually they would chew through her fence. But they weren't very interested in chewing on the salty kelp, and it shrinks really tight as it dries. It kind of gets smaller and it shrinks tightly so that all of these pieces come together more closely. Okay, so just so you can see in your mind what her fence looked like. Now remember, a whale is a huge animal, and what she says here is that as it curved outwards, it was taller than she was. So even if she was 5'6" like I am, which is not very tall, but is not very short, it was taller than her. So here she is, okay? So just so you guys can get an idea of how tall she would be, that it would be taller than her. So of course, it's way taller than the dogs. And this way, she can protect her house. She can protect her rock and her home, where she's got to do what? Who remembers what she needs to do? Exactly. She wants to be able to store food and water in a place that is safe, and she has to be able to go hunting without worrying that the dogs are going to come get her food. But why does she need to store food? I mean, there's just one of her. She could go out every day, right? Exactly, because winter will be coming, and in winter there won't be as much food for her to find. So she has to be able to dry food, store it, find a way to keep it safe for her to eat, and have enough water so that when there are winter storms and it's a windy day or there's a lot of heavy seas and she can't go out, she'll still have food. Okay, so I just wanted to stop there so you could imagine in your brain what her whale bone fence looked like. Okay, so if you want to go ahead and draw it so you kind of remember in your brain what it looks like, you are welcome to do so as we continue reading. And then remember, the rock was on one side, so she had the whalebone fence on 3 sides, and then she had the rock behind it, so the animals, the dogs especially, couldn't get in where the rock was. So she just needed to do 3 sides, so that didn't take quite as long as it could have taken. Okay, for a place to go in and out, I dug a hole under the fence, just wide and deep enough to crawl through. The bottom and the sides I lined with stones. On the outside, I covered the hole with a mat of woven brush to shed the rain, and on the inside with flat rock, which I was strong enough to move. I was able to make 8 steps between the sides of the fence, which gave me all the room I would need to store the things I gathered and wished to protect. I built a fence first because it was too cold to sleep on the rock, and I did not like to sleep in the shelter I had made until I was safe from the dogs. The house took longer to build than the fence because it rained many days and because the wood which I needed was scarce. And what does scarce mean? Yes, exactly. There's not a lot of wood on this island. So remember, all those trees grow very, very short. And if you found driftwood, you were really lucky and you could use the driftwood because it would have come from a different island that had bigger trees on it. There was a legend among our people that the island had once been covered with tall trees. This was a time long ago, at the beginning of the world, when Tumayotowit and Mukut ruled. The 2 gods quarreled about many things. Tumayowit wished people to die. Mukut did not. Tumayowit angrily went down to another world, under this world, taking his belonging with him so people die because he did. In that time there were tall trees, but now there were only a few in the ravines, and these were small and crooked. It was very hard to find one that would make a good pole. I searched many days, going out early in the morning and coming back at night before I found enough for the house. I used the rock for the back of the house, and the front I left open since the wind did not blow from this direction. The poles I made of equal length, using fire to cut them as well as a stone knife, which caused me much difficulty because I had never made such a tool before. There were 4 poles on each side, set in the earth, and twice that many for the roof. These I bound together with sinew and covered with female kelp, which has broad leaves. The winter was half over before I finished the house, but I slept there every night and felt secure because of the strong fence. The foxes came when I was cooking my food and stood outside gazing through the cracks. And the wild dogs also came, gnawing at the whale ribs, growling because they could not get in. I shot 2 of them, but not the leader. While I was building the fence and the house, I ate shellfish and perch, which I cooked on the flat rock. Afterwards, I made 2 utensils. Along the shore, there were stones that the sea had worn smooth. Most of them were round, but I found 2 with hollow places in the center, which I deepened and broadened by rubbing them with sand. Using these to cook in, I saved the juices of the fish, which are good and were wasted before. For cooking seeds and roots, I wove a tight basket of fine reeds, which is easy because I learned how to do it from my sister, Ulape. After the basket had dried in the sun, I gathered lumps of pitch on the shore, softened them over the fire, and rubbed them into the inside of the basket so that it would hold water. By heating small stones and dropping them into a mixture of water and seeds in the basket, I could make gruel, which is like oatmeal. So if you've ever tasted oatmeal or cream of wheat, that's kind of like what gruel is. I made a place for fire in the floor of my house, hollowing it out and lining it with rocks. In the village of Galasat, we made new fires every night, but now I made 1 fire, which I covered with ashes when I went to bed. The next night, I would remove the ashes and blow the embers. In this way, I saved myself much work. There were many gray mice on the island, and now I had food to keep from one meal to the other. I needed a safe place to put it. On the face of the rock, which was at the back of my wall of my house, were several cracks as high as my shoulder. These I cut out and smoothed to make shelves where I could store my food, and the mice could not reach it. By the time winter was over and grass began to show green on the hills, my house was comfortable. I was sheltered from the wind and rain and prowling animals. I could cook anything I wished to eat. Everything I wanted was here at hand. And it was now time to make plans for getting rid of the wild dogs, which had killed my brother and would kill me should they ever come upon me unarmed. I needed another and heavier spear, also a larger bow and sharper arrows. To collect the materials for these weapons, I searched the whole island, taking many suns to do it. This left only nights to work on them. Since I could not see well by a dim fire I used for cooking, I made lamps of dried bodies of little fish that we call sai-sai. The sai-sai is a color of silver and not much bigger than a finger. On nights when the moon shines full, these little fish come swimming out of the sea in schools so thick you can almost walk on them. They come with the waves and twist and turn on the sand as if they were dancing. I caught many basketfuls of sai-sai and put them out in the sun. Hung up by their tails from the poles of the roof, they made much odor, but burned with very clear light. I made the bow and arrows first and was pleased when I tried them that I could shoot farther and straighter than I had before. The spear I left to last. I wondered as I smoothed and shaped the long handle and fitted a stone collar around the end, both to give the spear weight and hold the spear point. If I could make this point the way the men of our tribe did, from the tooth of a sea elephant. Many nights I thought about it, wondering how I could possibly kill one of those great beasts. I could not use a net of kelp because that needed the strength of several men, nor could I remember that a bull elephant had ever been killed with an arrow or with a spear. Only after they had been caught in the net were they killed, and then with a club. We killed many cows for their oil using spears, but the teeth were not large. How would I do this? I did not know. Yet the more I thought about it, the greater was my determination to try. For there was nothing to be found on the island that made a good spear point, such as the tusk-like teeth of the bull sea elephant. So remember, she was talking about making weapons, that there was a superstition in the village that if women made weapons, it was not a good thing. So she decided, superstition is silly. I have to survive. I'm going to make weapons. So here we're hearing about her make weapons, and she needs to make a spear. So remember, as she was doing this, a couple chapters ago, when she made her first arrows, she was wondering if she would be cursed. And we haven't heard her thinking about that anymore. Let's see what happens, okay, as we continue chapter 13. I did not sleep much the night before I went to the place of the sea elephants. I thought again about the law that forbade women to make weapons. I wondered if my arrows would go straight, and if they did, would they pierce the animal's tough hide? What if one of the bulls turned on me? What if I was injured and then had to fight the wild dogs as I dragged myself homeward? I thought about these things most of the night, but with the sun I was up and on my way to the place where the sea elephants lived. When I reached the cliff, the animals had left the reef and gathered along the shore. Like gray boulders, the bulls sat on the pebbly slope. Below them, the cows and their babies played in the waves. Perhaps it was not right to speak of young sea elephants as babies, for they are as large as a man. But they are still babies in many ways. They follow their mothers around, waddling along on their flippers like children learning to walk, making crying sounds and sounds of pleasure that only the young make. And before they leave the shore and learn to swim, their mothers have to push them into the sea, which is often difficult because of their size. Some distance separated the bulls from each other, for they are bad-tempered, very jealous by nature, and quick to fight over anything that displeases them. There were 6 of them below me on the slope, each sitting alone like a great chief watching his herd of cows and babies. The cow has a smooth body and a face that looks much like that of a mouse, with a sharp pointed nose and whiskers, but the bull is different. His nose has a large hump on it which hangs down over his mouth. His skin is rough and looks like wet earth that has dried in the sun and cracked. He is an ugly animal. From the top of the cliff, I looked down at each of the sea elephants and tried to choose the smallest of the 6. They were all the same size, save one, which was the farthest from me and partly hidden by a rock. He was about half as large as the others, a young bull. Since no cows were playing among the waves in front of him, I knew he did not have a herd of his own, and for that reason would not be wary or quickly angered. Quietly, I let myself down over the edge of the cliff. To reach him, I had to pass behind the others, being careful not to alarm them. They fear nothing and will not move if they saw me, but it was better, I thought, not to put them on their guard. I carried my new bow, which was almost as tall as I, and had 5 arrows. The path was rough and covered with small stones. I took pains not to send them tumbling down the slope. I also was careful not to be seen by the cows, which get alarmed easily and would have warned the rest of their herd with their cries. I crawled behind a big rock near the bull. Then I got to my feet and fitted an arrow to the bow, although I suddenly remembered my father's warning that because I was a woman, the bow would break. I'm going to stop right there. What do you think is going to happen? Do you think that this superstition is true? Do you think something's going to happen? Or do you think she's going to be able to hunt this young bull just fine? So think about it for a second. Make your prediction, write it down, or think about it in your head, and let's see what happens next. Okay, so she's thinking about her father's warning. The sun was far in the west, but luckily my shadow fell away from the young bull. The distance between us was short, and his back was turned squarely toward me. Still, I did not know where to place the first arrow, whether in his shoulders or in his head. The skin of the sea elephant is rough, yet very thin, but beneath it are thick layers of fat. And though his body is large, his head is small and makes a poor target. While I stood there behind the rock, not knowing what to do, again aware of my father's warning that a bow in the hands of a woman will always break in times of danger, the animal began to move toward the shore. At first I thought that by some chance he had heard me, I soon saw that he was on his way toward the cows that belonged to the old bull sitting nearby. The sea elephant moves fast in spite of his size, waddling along on his great flippers while he uses it like hands. The bull was nearing the water. I let the arrow go and it went straight. At the last instant, he changed direction, and though the bow did not break, the arrow passed harmlessly to one side. I had failed to notice that the old bull was moving down the slope until I heard stones grating against each other. Quickly, he overtook his rival and with a single thrust of his shoulders overturned him. The young bull stood as high as a tall man and twice that length, yet from the force of the blow he rolled into the water and laid there stunned. The old bull bore down upon him, swinging his head and bellowing so loudly it echoed against the cliffs. The herd of cows and calves who were lying in the waves and scratching their backs with their flippers stopped and watched the battle. Two of the cows were in the bull's path as he waddled toward his rival, but he went over them as if they were small stones. Using his tusk-like teeth, he ripped a long gash in the young bull's side. The young bull raised himself, and as he turned, his small eyes shone fiercely red. When the old bull slashed at him again, he struck first and sunk his teeth into the other's neck. He did not let go, and the two rolled over in the waves, slashing the water high in the air. The cows had scattered by now, but the other bulls still sat quietly on the slope. The two fighters paused, getting ready for a new attack. It was a good chance to send an arrow into the young bull, who lay on his back with his teeth still grasping the other's neck. But I hoped he would win the battle, and I stood there and did not move. The old bull had many deep scars in his head and shoulders from battles he had fought before. Suddenly, he lashed out with his tail, trying to loose the hold on his neck, and struck the side of a rock. With his tail against the rock, he flung his body out of the water and broke away. He came quickly up the slope, his great mouth open, the young bull close behind him. He came toward me, and in haste to get out of his way, not knowing whether he was bent on attacking me, I stepped back. In doing so, I tripped over a stone and fell to my knees. I felt a sharp pain in my leg, but was up quickly. By this time, the old bull had whirled around and turned upon his pursuer so fast that the young bull was taken by surprise. Again, the young bull's flank was ripped deep, and again the force of the blow threw him backward into the water. The waves grew redder from his blood, but this time he rolled over and waited for the charge. He met the old bull with his shoulder, the sound like rocks crashing together. Once more the young bull caught the other's throat, and together they disappeared beneath the wave. When they came up, they were still locked together. The sun had gone down, and it was so dark I could no longer see clearly. My leg had now begun to hurt. Since I had a long way to go, I left them. I could hear their bellowing as I went up the cliff, and for a long time afterwards. We are going to stop there. We're ready for chapter 14. So she had an adventure. She wasn't able to get the tusk, but she's hurt her leg. What do you think she is thinking right now as she's trying to get home before it gets too dark and her leg is hurting and she was not successful in her hunt? So write your prediction and we'll find out what happens next in chapter 14. I'll see you next time.